Hello and welcome! Today we are in an upcoming Tier 8 German battleship. She is still a work in progress and thus subject to change. I have been given this ship by Wargaming for review purposes. This is what she's called. She is called Gladow, Grim, Rada and Third. She is one-eyed. She is also called Highest and True Guesser. She is Grimnir and the Hooded One. She is the All-Father, Gondlir, the One-Bearer. She has as many names as there are winds, as many titles as there are ways to die. Her ravens are Hugin and Munin, Thought and Memory. Her wolves are Freki and Geri. Her horse is the Gallows. She is Odin. Thank you, Neil Gaiman, for this intro and the amazing book. If I had to summarize what the Odin is like, she is basically the guns of the Scharnhorst mixed with the secondaries of Bismarck, the Hydra of the Bismarck, and the torpedoes of the Tirpitz. And she is tier 8 like that, with slightly better concealment. Armor is basically the same as the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. Maneuverability, speed, etc. is also very similar. She also has a very nice horn, by the way. See? Sounds quite nice. She does have some downsides though. One thing is that she has 19-kilometer range. And this is why I use a scout plane on her, because, unfortunately, quite often you will end up in situations where you need more range than that, particularly when you are in tier 10 matches or at the start of the match like right now. I also often end up firing HE with the ship, even though the damage per minute is fairly low. It's still better than the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, but still fairly low. At around 90k I believe. But I fire HE because these are 305mm caliber guns, so technically they're bigger guns than the Scharnhorst. The shells are fairly fast, but their dispersion is horrible. And unfortunately, with the caliber of the guns, it means that they cannot overmatch a lot of armor, especially cruiser armor. They can only overmatch about 21mm of armor. So you run into a tier 7 battleship, you cannot overmatch the bow of that. You run into, I don't know, a Baltimore with 27mm bow, you can't overmatch that either. In fact, you can't overmatch the bow of almost any cruiser. And that is actually quite a shame, because it often means that you're, I would say, kind of helpless, because you're not really. At least I'm playing a full secondary build, meaning that those secondaries are actually rather scary for cruisers. So if you do end up in a situation where a cruiser points their nose at you, all you really need to do is wait, because the secondaries will eventually melt them. And the nice thing with the secondaries on this ship is that she actually has a 150mm triple turret at the front and one at the stern, meaning that if you are exactly bow on towards the target, that one secondary will still fire. Some of the side ones might as well, because, well, in practice you're almost never bow on exactly. The downside of the AP is though that, you know, it's smaller caliber, meaning that I think it doesn't have quite as much pen, although I haven't actually ever checked the numbers, but it feels that way. It does mean though that quite often you'll be firing HE even at battleships, because you just get fires. Even though the DPM might not be the greatest, you still get fires, and it synergizes very well with the secondaries. The secondaries with full upgrades do have 11.3km range, so not quite as much as the Grossa Kaufest, for example, but it's very good still. And I'm going to try to take advantage of this right now. Right now I probably should be firing AP at that Bismarck, which is why I switched, but since I had HE loaded I might as well, cause hey, I can get a fire, which I did. And now my secondary should start firing any day now. Good, see? Secondary fires. I'll be honest though, the secondary dispersion doesn't actually look all that much worse than the main battery dispersion, which is something I kinda dislike on the ship. Overall, I don't really enjoy this type of ship too much. I never liked the Scharnhorst much either, because the smaller caliber guns just don't feel great to me. And spamming HE in these types of battleships is also not the greatest feeling, because I always feel like I have this nagging feeling in the back of my head that goes, You could be in a cruiser and just deal more damage, the exact same way you're dealing damage right now. But obviously it's not exactly the same because, well, you're still bringing a battleship to the table with the Odin. I mean, you still bring the secondaries, you still bring the armor, you still bring the tanking, which is an important part of a game. And you also bring the focus fire. Because of the armor, the Odin can tank a lot more damage than you could in any cruiser. Meaning that you do quite a few things for your team, although you might not be rewarded for it very well in the game. This game I'm getting some incredible fire RNG though. I mean, I have 5 fires in what, 26 shells and a couple of secondary hits? That is quite crazy. Now, I have a Tirpitz coming for me. She does have torpedoes. I have a Hydro though, which is very nice. She doesn't have a Hydro. I also have torpedoes, which are, I think, actually exactly the same as the Tirpitz's torpedoes. And our armor scheme is basically the same as well. Oh, by the way, I will show the port at around the 17-16 minute mark, probably the 17, where I'll go over a lot of the details on the ship and my commander skills, but basically it's a secondary build with concealment. See, the Tirpitz launched torpedoes, but he kinda screwed up because he ran aground, so I can torpedo him instead. Easy game, right? Look how bad the Tirpitz is compared to the Odin. But I mean, it makes sense, right? The Odin is a god, after all. Here I'm thinking that I should probably turn and launch torpedoes from the other side. You know? But apparently it's unnecessary because she got detonated with one of them. By the way, check out the torpedoes. They went through the ship. Look at that. The torpedoes they keep going. Imagine that. Imagine if we had over-penetrating torpedoes on other ships. Like, imagine a Shimakaze with over-penetrating torpedoes. That could be really scary, right? Luckily though, Shimakazes do not benefit from this godly technology. Okay, I need to clear this up. That was a joke. That's probably a bug. The torpedoes probably aren't armed or anything. They just sometimes bug out where they just keep going to infinity and beyond. They even go through islands, which is quite amazing. Anyway, now we're gonna chase the Loyang and the Bismarck. I wonder why the Loyang is actually visible right now. Well, regardless, my secondaries are trained on her, and so are my main batteries. Because the earlier we can deal with the destroyer, the more carefree we can be. So far the match where both teams are even, both teams have lost 3 ships, but I do think that we are in a slightly better position. Even though the enemy technically is gonna control more caps in a moment, I think we have a very good grasp on the sea cap. I don't think the enemy has any chance of taking it away from us. So the fight for us will be entirely on the B cap. And I think that once we bring all of our battleships from the C cap into the B cap, we're gonna have a good chance of dealing with the red team. Odin in this game has actually been fairly scary for the enemy team. I mean, we took care of the Tirpitz and we're chasing off a whole bunch of other ships, although I suppose I have some help from these green ships on, you know, on the minimap. I don't know who they are. I guess they're trying to steal all of my kills, right? Well, they didn't get that one. Haha. Honestly, Odin in this case plays more or less like you would a Tirpitz or a Bismarck. Your main threat is the secondaries and the main guns. Pretty much like you would be on the Tirpitz and the Bismarck. When you get closer, I guess she's more like the Tirpitz. But overall, it's similar. Unfortunately though, against some cruisers you can't overmatch them, but in this game that's not really an issue. At least not anymore. So basically, it wouldn't matter at this point whether you're a Tirpitz or an Odin, but you will see in this match how horrifyingly bad some of the dispersion on these guns can be. I mean, they're actually really horrible. And I hope that the buff that some of the German battleships are getting will include the Odin. This actually looks pretty decent. Like, I'm not gonna complain too much about this type of salvo. But some of them, the horizontal dispersion gets so bad that it's basically as wide as an actual battleship. Which people joke about at times, but in practice you almost never see. But on this ship I've seen it quite a few times. And that is very disheartening, because it means you can't really fire these guns at long range. And I mean, the ship only has 19 kilometers range. For a battleship, that's not exactly great in the first place. By the way, tomorrow I'll put probably another Odin video where I'll be in a tier 10 match. Where I'll be staying quite far away because it's difficult to handle tier 10 ships in a ship like this. And there will be lots of HE as well. Although I guess my fire RNG isn't quite as good as it is in this one. So, Bismarck at 15 kilometers. This time I fired AP, because she is showing roughly broadside. And they should deal some damage. 3000 damage, not exactly amazing. This is exactly why I've been firing so much HE. Because that HE just means I get fires, and fire damage adds up rather nicely. Better than the HE spam at least. And perhaps better than the AP as well. The 20-second reload is nice and all, but honestly, the DPM is still fairly low. The DPM on AP is actually pretty good. Unfortunately, you're not really going to Citadel battleships, so it only really works against cruisers, and cruisers that aren't angled, because you can't overmatch them either. Which is why I don't really like the style of the ship. But I think people who enjoyed the Scharnhorst probably will like the ship too. Did you see that one shell? That one shell was like 2 ship widths off from the target. That's the kind of crazy dispersion I have been talking about. But at least you'll get some hits. I mean, this time I actually hit 5 shells. This is not something to complain about. Then again, it's 13 kilometers. If I couldn't hit almost half of my shells at this kind of range as a battleship, that could be some trouble. Anyway, it seems that Tirpitz is dealt with. By the way, the game's basically over. We're definitely winning this game. That Tirpitz will be dealt with, so it's time to go after the CV. So now it's time to test our anti-air, because I will be the closest ship to the enemy CV, which means that she will definitely strike me. However, I have a lot of HP left, which means that I don't need to care too much about these damage over time attacks, and even if she uses torpedo bombers, well, I have so much HP left that I can just take them. I don't need to dodge. I launch a plane because maybe the CV is right behind this island, and the plane might spot her, so I would get early information. Because I don't really trust my CV to do useful things like that, at least not yet. I'm gonna take a torpedo here, because it really isn't worth it to try to dodge. I probably could have actually dodged those torpedoes, but I don't think it was worth it. I might be flooded, which would be a shame, because that slows the ship down, but I think it'll be fine. I mean, I have a heal going, and sure, I'll take some more damage, but the heal is gonna just... I don't think the Lexington can sink me. Even if I don't basically do anything, even if I just stand still. I don't think the Lexington has the DPM to actually sink me. I guess the game could actually... I guess not before the game ends, but before the time it takes me to get next to her. I mean, right now, if she wasn't behind the island, my secondaries would be in range in 700 meters. Right, and the secondaries will just add up in damage. This is also an interesting question. If you're in any other battleship, which ammo type would you use? It's obviously easy, right? You'll go with AP because you can just overmatch the bow of the Lexington. Can I do that on this ship? I'm not sure. I should be able to, right? But on the other hand, I am uncertain. Because I don't know what the deck armor of a Lexington is. Sorry, the bow armor of a Lexington is. So it's an interesting conundrum, because your gun caliber is just smaller. 305 guns, you know, did you see that dispersion? This is at 9 kilometers. Just look at how wide these shells go. Jesus. And this is only at 9 kilometers. I mean, imagine what you can get at longer ranges. Luckily though, in this game it doesn't really matter because, well, this one's in the bag. So let's see, does AP work on penning the bow? I think it does. That's a nice 9k damage. I do switch to HE, but I think that was a mistake. I probably should have stayed on AP here. Look at those secondaries go. I got 2 shell hits. Bow on Lexington at 8 kilometers with HE. That's some horrifying dispersion, seriously. Well, anyway, we still got CV in the end, and that's all that really matters, right? 174k damage, solo cap, 4 ships sunk, 14 planes, but I think I got quite lucky with fire RNG this game. 12 fires, that is incredible. 2500 base XP, pretty nice. Compliment the Akizuki, because obviously she did well as well. Detailed report? Well, the 50k torpedo was pretty nice, but only 21k with the AP and only 31k with HE. But I mean, I did 56k with fires and 14k with secondaries. So HE plus secondaries together, you know, the fire damage is added to them. So, let's take a look at the Odin in port. She is a very nice looking German battleship. Very reminiscent of the Bismarck and Tirpitz. 2 battleships that I really like the look of. She obviously has the oversized German battleship turrets, except this time there's 3 barrels per turret. But they are lower caliber at 305s. The defining feature of the ship really is the guns, I suppose. The secondaries, she is basically a secondary battleship with a slightly different secondary loadout than what we're used to. There's a 150mm triple turret at the front and 1 at the back. And then there are some on the sides that are 128s. The nice thing is that this can actually fire directly towards the front. The not so nice thing is that their firing angles aren't the greatest, so you kinda do need to show a lot of broadside to have both of these large turrets firing. But I mean, it is what it is, you can't have it both ways. Now the guns are lower caliber, they are 305s, and this is a tier 8 battleship, meaning that this can be quite a problem. The shells are actually fairly fast, that is, they don't seem to be slowed down by drag too much, and it's possible to get the shells where you're firing rather quickly. The problem is that the guns seem very inaccurate to me. Sometimes I'll fire and the dispersion is as wide as the battleship I'm firing at, which is crazy because you almost never get that bad dispersion on battleships, but you do on the Odin. The secondaries are fairly effective. With full secondary upgrades you can get them to 11.3 kilometer range, and considering that with concealment stuff as well, you can get your ship concealment down to 12 kilometers, this can be quite a surprise. She also gets the hydro from Bismarck, but on top of that she gets the torpedoes from the Tirpitz, so at close range this ship can be quite deadly. Now, obviously the downside is that 305 guns means that you cannot overmatch even 25mm of armor. You can only overmatch 21, I believe. Meaning that against cruisers, you can't actually overmatch the bow of basically any cruiser you meet, meaning that any cruiser can just point their bow at you and I guess all you can do is really fire your HE and secondaries. Then again, the secondaries are quite effective because they do have some very nice penetration, 37 and 31. This is without IFHE or anything, meaning that this will deal a lot of damage to cruisers. So I really like the close range secondary style, especially the one where you can surprise them because of concealment. But on the other hand, the guns feel very, very lacking to me. And it very much reminds me of the Scharnhorst, which is a ship I didn't really get along with. I just found the guns to be lacking. So armor layout, it's basically the same as the Tirpitz and Bismarck, except this upper armor plate is 45, whereas on the Tirpitz and Bismarck this is like 100 something. But she has the same 60mm bow plate, meaning that it protects the citadel, 32mm bow, stern as well, then the deck armor is 50, and she also has a turtleback, which protects the citadel rather well, and even the armor values on these are basically the same as on the Tirpitz and the Bismarck. So the armor scheme is pretty good, as we know from those two battleships already. Maneuverability is about the same. She's half a knot slower than the Bismarck and Tirpitz, but she also gets about 50 meters better turning circle, which is probably a better thing than the half a knot speed. Rudder shift is also about 2 seconds better, so she is slightly more maneuverable, but then again the Tirpitz and Bismarck aren't exactly slouches in that either. Anti-air, it's German anti-air, it's okay, but it could be better. But again, it's okay. I mean, you can do a lot worse at this tier. So yeah, overall I would say that secondary-wise, it's fairly effective, but the guns, for me, aren't the greatest. Survivability on her is pretty okay, but she does have 10% less HP than the Tirpitz and the Bismarck, so that is something to keep in mind. Next up, her consumables. Like I said, standard battleship damage control party, a standard heal. Then she has the option of a scout plane or a fighter. I recommend the scout plane because your range is 19 kilometers. And then last you have access to Hydro, 5 kilometer detectability on ships and 3.5 on torpedoes. So it's not this terrible Hydro like the Goliath gets. It's actually, you know, Hydro you can do things with. And her maneuverability is good enough to be able to dodge many torpedoes with it. This is the commander skill build I went with. So I went with priority target, adrenaline rush, because you don't really need expert marksman that much. I suppose this is one aspect where these guns shine over the Tirpitz and the Bismarck. The turret traverse is pretty decent at 30 seconds, even without expert marksman. Whereas on Tirpitz and Bismarck I believe you need it, and you still don't get it quite as good. Next up I take Superintendent, obviously because you want the extra heal. Then, I suppose it depends on what kind of build you want to go for. I went with Concealment, Advanced Firing Training, and Manual Secondaries. And the last point I spent on Preventative Maintenance. I really like the secondary build. At first I thought of going IFHE, but I settled on Concealment because 12 km concealment and 11.3 km secondary range can be quite funny, because there's only a 700 meter difference between you being able to fire your secondaries, and in thunderstorms and whatnot, it gets even better because sometimes you can fire secondaries without ever being spotted. Upgrades, standard main arms modification, damage control system modification, then secondary range obviously, damage control system modification too because we want fewer fires, and last slot is obviously concealment. So yeah, it's a ship that I'm really torn on. I really enjoy the secondaries, I enjoy going close and stuff like that. But I can more or less get that with the Tirpitz, with the added upside that I don't have to be afraid of so many cruisers. Because on Odin, if you run into a competent cruiser, regardless basically which cruiser it is, they can make your life very difficult. Or at least they can survive for long enough that they can, you know, retaliate towards you. Whereas against the Tirpitz and the Bismarck, well, that's up to RNG. But here RNG isn't involved because you can't overmatch their bows. Then again, I suppose the secondaries are in some ways more effective in that you can fire them directly towards the front, that is the bigger guns here, and that can be quite nice. And the fact that you get torpedoes and hydro both. But overall, I don't know. She feels, when actually playing her, she feels a lot like a better Scharnhorst, which I suppose many players are going to enjoy. But I'll warn you that at tier 10, and you're gonna get into tier 10 matches with the ship, she isn't quite as fun as you might expect. But when you're top tier, it is quite nice. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, Seb Almoso, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.